Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we are diving straight into the absolute mystery that is the human brain. Now look, we all have this deeply held assumption, like this total conviction really, that we are unified beings, right? We just assume there's a single you hanging out inside your skull, totally in control of your actions, your thoughts, the whole shebang. But what if I told you that this beautifully orchestrated sense of self is actually just a magnificent illusion? Let's get into it.
I want you to stop and ask yourself right now, who is really driving your decisions? Are you genuinely the author of your own story every single time you make a choice, or is there something hidden behind the curtain, pulling the strings? You probably think you decided to click on this explainer purely out of conscious free will, but underneath the surface, there's this incredibly complex 3-pound piece of matter making countless choices for you, totally under the radar.
To show you exactly what I mean, let's do a quick little cognitive test right now. Seriously, follow along with me right from your screen. Okay, lift both of your hands in the air. Now, with your left hand, start drawing a shape in the air. Let's just go with a circle. Okay, keep doing it. Now, at the exact same time, with your right hand, try to draw a completely different shape, like a triangle or a square. Go on, try to do it as fast as you can at the exact same time.
So, did your hands completely freeze up? Or did they just give up and start drawing the exact same shape together? You almost certainly failed that test. And honestly, that's exactly the point. Your hands started squabbling because the motor commands in one hemisphere of your brain actively interfered with the other. You see, your brain isn't just one single unified machine. It's actually a collection of different systems that are constantly fighting for control. And when you try to do two completely different conscious tasks at once, those systems cross their wires.
This brings us to section 1, 2 minds, 1 brain. To understand why these internal systems clash so much, we need to look at the actual physical anatomy of the brain itself.
Your brain is, of course, famously divided into 2 halves. The left hemisphere generally handles things like language, speech, and it controls the right side of your body. The right hemisphere, on the other hand, evaluates emotions, visual space, and runs the left side of your body. Now, to give you that seamless illusion of being one single person, these 2 sides are constantly talking to each other through a massive, thick bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. Think of it like a high-speed information superhighway. But what happens if that highway gets blocked or destroyed? Well, for some patients with really severe epilepsy, surgeons actually sever the corpus callosum to stop seizures from spreading. We call these split-brain patients. And as pioneering neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga puts it, studying these folks proves that there can be 2 separated minds inside one system. It is wild. When that bridge is cut, an entire half of the brain literally cannot communicate with the rest. Each hemisphere can understand, remember, feel, and think completely on its own, totally independently of the other side.
Take the absolute mind-bending story of a split-brain patient named Joe. Researchers flashed the word Texas on a screen so incredibly fast that only his right hemisphere saw it. Now, because his right hemisphere doesn't really do language, when they asked Joe what he saw, his left talking hemisphere truthfully replied, "I didn't see anything." But then, they asked his left hand, which is controlled by that right brain, to just draw what it saw. And with total confidence, his hand drew a cowboy hat. His right brain knew exactly what it saw and cross-cued the confused left brain by drawing a picture. That is literally 2 separate minds operating inside one skull.
Section 2, the science of guilt. Mind-blowing, right? But the divisions in our brain aren't just a physical left versus right thing. Different localized regions also battle it out over our everyday behavior.
We usually think of emotions as these sort of rational forces that just get in the way of logical decision-making. But science tells a totally different story. I want you to meet the insula. It's a deep brain region that basically acts as your body's built-in alarm system for guilt. In behavioral economics games like the trust game, where people have to choose between being selfish for a quick cash reward or being cooperative, researchers found something amazing. The insula produces a literal gut feeling that makes you feel awful if you cheat. So contrary to what you might think, emotions like guilt actually step in to help us make better, more cooperative decisions. Neuroscientist Luke Chang uses a fantastic metaphor to explain this. Think of the insula like a thermometer. It simply detects the ambient emotional temperature. It gives you that gut feeling saying, hey, this feels wrong. But that raw information has to go somewhere to actually be acted upon, right? That is where the prefrontal cortex steps in, acting as the thermostat. It takes that emotional temperature, processes it against your social goals, and physically turns the dial on your behavior. It's constantly balancing your selfish dopamine hits with empathetic guilt. But if you lose that thermostat, everything falls apart. Take the famous classic case of Phineas Gage. He was a 19th century railroad worker who had a massive iron rod blown straight through his prefrontal cortex. Amazingly, he survived. He kept his memories, his motor skills, everything. But his friends quickly noticed he was no longer Gage. He became irreverent, profane, and totally lost his social filter. His brain's thermostat was quite literally destroyed, proving that our very personality and our moral compass live right there in these fragile, specialized structures.
Moving on to Section 3, shaped by social forces. So our internal hardware dictates a whole lot of who we are. But what about the outside world?
We just established that the brain is this machine operating largely without your conscious input. But who programmed the machine in the first place? Well, a lot of it actually comes from external forces. We are profoundly shaped by the expectations of the people around us. We learn and develop by mimicking other brains. And, perhaps most surprisingly of all, our neural wiring is actually dictated by trauma passed down through generations.
Let me give you an absolutely incredible example of that last point. Neuroscientist Bianca Jones-Marlin did a groundbreaking experiment where she paired the smell of almonds with a mild shock in mice. As expected, the mice grew extra cells in their noses to detect almonds, identifying that smell as a threat. But here is the jaw-dropping part. Those mice eventually had offspring, and without ever being shocked or exposed to that scent themselves, the babies were born with those exact same extra almond-detecting cells. The trauma literally rewired the biology of the next generation. Your ancestors' experiences are unconsciously dictating how your brain operates right this second. It's wild.
Which brings us to Section 4, the fragile illusion of agency. Because if our biology, our separated brain hemispheres, and even our ancestors' trauma are the ones pulling the strings, well, we arrive at the most confronting realization of this entire explainer.
50 milliseconds. That tiny, almost imperceptible sliver of time is enough to shatter our deeply held sense of free will. In lab tests, scientists can place sensors on a subject's head and arm and just ask them to randomly choose to move their finger. By reading the electrical signals, the scientists can actually detect the brain initiating the movement almost 50 milliseconds before the person physically moves, or even consciously feels like they made a choice. Your unconscious brain makes the decision first and just sort of hands you the receipt later.
And our grasp on that agency is incredibly weak. In a fascinating experiment using something called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, researchers used a magnetic field to physically force a subject's finger to move right as they were independently deciding to move it. The results were staggering. Even when the subject actually initiated the movement themselves, that slight interference from the magnet completely threw them off. They immediately reported a massive drop in perceived agency, often claiming the computer did it entirely. We are shockingly happy to just relinquish our feeling of control.
And this brings us to a pretty radical conclusion. As neuroscientist Anil Seth explains, our sense of voluntary action is largely retrospective. Agency isn't always the starting point. Instead, the brain looks at what the body just did, analyzes all the social and physical feedback, and essentially invents a story that makes sense of it as an act of free will. The brain is a meaning-maker machine, and agency is just one of the stories it tells you to keep you sane.
Section 5. Reclaiming your agency. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. If I'm not in control, what's the point? But don't despair. Let's see how surrendering this illusion can actually be your greatest superpower. Think about a time you had to perform a well-practiced task, maybe shooting a free throw in basketball or giving a big presentation. When you apply strict conscious control, when you overthink it, you over-monitor yourself, you choke under pressure, and your performance absolutely plummets. But compare that to unconscious flow. Researchers put highly skilled freestyle rappers in an MRI machine. When they were spontaneously improvising, their prefrontal cortex, that conscious decision-making thermostat we talked about earlier, actually deactivated. By letting their conscious control power down, they unlocked brilliant, spontaneous creativity. The science makes one thing very, very clear. As neuroscientist Bobby Castori elegantly states, your brain is made of almost 90 billion neurons producing the beautiful, fragile illusion that there is a single person inside. Yes, we are multifaceted, deeply influenced by hidden trauma, social mimicry, and split-brain squabbles. But honestly, that doesn't make us any less magnificent. The unconscious machinery driving you is incredibly powerful.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We spend so much energy fiercely clinging to the illusion of absolute conscious control. But if you accept that you aren't fully in the driver's seat, what amazing things could your unconscious mind achieve if you just let it go and trusted the flow?
Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and until next time, keep questioning everything you think you know about yourself.